Hello, everyone. I'm going to present our paper called Generalization Ability of MOS Prediction Networks. So an overview of the talk. First, I'll explain the motivation, then the research questions we attempt to answer, followed by a description of our data sets, our experiments, and our conclusions. So the motivation for this work is that researchers who build text-to-speech and voice conversion systems need to evaluate these systems. And typically this is done using listening tests with human listeners, giving their opinions. And a popular kind of test is called the Mean Opinion Score Test, or MOS. In this test, listeners listen to synthesized samples one by one and rate the quality on a scale such as from 1 to 5 to answer a question such as, how natural does this audio sound? So these subjective tests are the gold standard for evaluating synthesized speech. However, they have some drawbacks. The first is that they're expensive. They cost time and money. And the second is that they are very context dependent. Numbers cannot be meaningfully compared across different listening tests. So that brings us to the topic of automatic speech quality assessment. So this attempts to predict human ratings of synthesized samples, and you can take a data-driven approach, such as one based on deep learning, and train a system using data from a listening test. So this kind of system can have good correlation of its predictions with the ratings from human listeners for samples in the same listening test. However, these models tend to have bad generalization ability to unseen systems and different listening test contexts. The research questions we try to answer are, what can help to improve generalization ability? Can we use a larger and more diverse training set? Can we use data augmentation? Can self-supervised learning pre-trained models help? And can we fine-tune on a small amount of target domain data? And furthermore, what types of unseen conditions are the most difficult for MOS prediction? So here are the data sets that we used. Our first data set is our main or in-domain data. This is a data set we call BVCC. In this data set, we collected many samples from English, text-to-speech, and voice conversion systems spanning over a decade of work, collected from past Blizzard challenges, voice conversion challenges, and ESPNet TTS. So altogether, there are samples from 187 different systems, and we have 8 ratings per sample and a little over 7,000 samples. And we evaluated these all together in one listening test. Next, we have 3 out-of-domain data sets. Out-of-domain in this work means data from different listening tests. So first we have the ASV Spoof Challenge 2019 listening test. So this is English samples from a variety of text-to-speech and voice conversion systems. So this is 14 systems and close to 20,000 samples. Then we have Blizzard Challenge 2019. This is Chinese TTS, 26 different systems, a little over 1,300 samples. And finally, we have from a paper in 2018, a comparison of, for Japanese text-to-speech, 4 different acoustic models and 4 different vocoders, in a total 10 different combinations, 10 systems, and close to 5,000 samples. So as for our training, development, and testing splits, we chose them to match as closely as possible to the overall distribution of ratings for each data set. And we also held out unseen speakers, systems, listeners, and texts for the development and test set where possible. So for BVCC, our in-domain data, we have 70% of the data for training and 15 and 15% for validation and test sets. And for the out-of-domain data, I'd like to emphasize that we're never training on this data from scratch. We're only using it for fine-tuning. We intentionally pick a small fine-tuning set, small portion of the data for fine-tuning. So we have a third, and third for fine-tuning, validation, and test. Now, as for our experiments, first we run some experiments using the BVCC data only. We train MOSNet on BVCC, and we fine-tune SSL models for MOS prediction using BVCC. Then we move on to the out-of-domain data sets to examine the generalization ability. So we have two settings for that, zero shot and fine tuning. We have 4 different evaluation metrics. The first is mean squared error, where lower is better. And then we have 3 different correlation metrics as well, where higher is better. So our first set of experiments use MOSNet, which is a CNN BLSTM architecture for MOS prediction. So first, the authors of MOSNet kindly provided their pre-trained model, which was pre-trained on Voice Conversion Challenge 2018. So we look at the zero-shot performance of this pre-trained MOSNet on our BVCC test set. Then we try training MOSNet from scratch on the BVCC training set. Then we try fine-tuning the pre-trained MOSNet on BVCC. And then we try 2 different types of data augmentation, as well as using both combined. So the first type of data augmentation is silence augmentation. For this, we randomly add or trim a very small amount of silence on the ends of the utterances. And for speed augmentation, we very slightly speed up or slow down the audio by a very small random amount. And the motivation for these kinds of augmentation are that these are very, very small changes to the audio that we don't expect would substantially change the human ratings for MOS for these samples. So interestingly, we found that training from scratch on BVCC was worse than simply using the pre-trained model. The reason for this is that BVCC actually has a smaller number of audio samples in total than BCC 2018, even though BVCC has a larger number of systems represented and also more ratings per sample. However, more ratings per sample doesn't end up meaning more data, because for training MOSNet, we actually use the average of all of the ratings per sample to do the training. So it ends up being not enough data. As for fine tuning, however, this gave a large jump in performance. And finally, using both types of data augmentation together gives even further improvement. Next, we look at fine tuning SSL models for the MOS prediction task. This is very, very simple fine tuning of the pre-trained models that were made available on the FAIRSEEK project's GitHub page. So there are 7 models that have been made available that we try in this experiment. And we found that the best results come from using wave-to-vec small and wave-to-vec large as base models. And I'd also like to mention that the third best model on the development set was one called XLSR. This model is interesting because it's the only one of the 7 that was pre-trained on multilingual data. So moving on to the out-of-domain experiments, we picked the best and most interesting models from our previous experiments. So for MOSNet, that's the pre-trained one, the one that we fine-tuned using BVCC, and the one fine-tuned using the 2 types of data augmentation. And for the SSL models, that's wave-to-vec small, wave-to-vec large, and the multilingual XLSR. We look at 2 different generalization scenarios. The first is zero shot, where the out-of-domain data is completely unseen. And the second one is to fine-tune using the fine-tuning set of the out-of-domain data. So here are our results, and I'll explain this table in parts. So here, these 3 sections are for each of the 3 out-of-domain data sets that we use. Then on the left side, we have zero-shot results, and on the right side, we have fine-tuning results. So you can see, so the best results for each metric are in each column are in bold, and we can see that overall, the best results tend to appear in the for the SSL-based models. Now, interestingly, we see that the pre-trained MOSNet actually has some of the better results for mean squared error in the zero-shot condition, and we can explain this a little on the next slide. So this is showing a scatter plot of the top row is zero-shot prediction, and the bottom row is fine-tuning. We have actual MOS on the x-axis and predicted MOS on the y-axis. And then we have each of the 6 models that we explored. So MOSNet, the pre-trained MOSNet in the zero-shot condition tends to guess about 3 for everything. So in terms of mean squared error, this doesn't result in such large errors, but in terms of what do we get anything actually useful from these predictions, we don't really. Now, if we move over to the SSL-based models, we can see that even though there's a big spread in the predictions, they're kind of all over the range. We can see that for each data set, the correlations kind of start to emerge. We can see that the correlations are actually not that bad, even in the zero-shot condition. Now, if we fine-tune all of these models on just a small amount of the target data, we can see the correlations just line right up, especially for the SSL models. So we don't actually need that much data to get really nice correlations for this. The last thing we did was we analyzed the difficulty of various unseen categories. And the way we did this was for each unseen category, we looked at the squared errors for seen versus unseen, and we looked at whether the unseen errors were significantly higher than the seen ones. So when the unseen category was significantly higher than the seen one, we put it in bold. So we can see that overall, unseen speakers, unseen listeners, and unseen texts are not extremely difficult. Certain models find them difficult, but overall, they are not. Now, on the other hand, unseen systems, for 2 out of the 3 data sets, all models find unseen systems to be significantly more difficult. Now, as for the COM18 data set, which was different combinations of acoustic models and vocoders, we see that this is actually not the case. And this is not surprising because the unseen systems in this case were not totally unseen. Either their acoustic model or their vocoder was actually previously seen in the training data, and this was unavoidable due to the combinations that were available in the data. So we can see that even when part of a model, when part of a system was seen, it already becomes easier to predict. So finally, our conclusions, we find that a large and diverse training data set can help to improve MOS prediction in the case where pre-trained models are fine-tuned. So even though our data set had broad coverage of different synthesis methods, it was not enough data to train MOS nets from scratch. We found that data augmentation could help to improve MOS prediction, but only for smaller models like MOSNet. Data augmentation did not improve SSL-based models. Self-supervised learning-based speech models could successfully be fine-tuned for MOS prediction, and they could also generalize well to new listening tests with further fine-tuning. And finally, unseen systems were the most challenging category. Lastly, I'd like to mention the Voice MOS Challenge 2022. We released our BVCC dataset to challenge participants to train MOS prediction systems, and this was accepted as a special session at Interspeech 2022. And we saw a lot of really interesting approaches to the MOS prediction task. So if you're interested in this problem, then definitely check out the special session because there's going to be many nice papers there. So that's all. Thank you very much.